and welcome back to Memories of a Musician. Once again, it's a pleasure to have our audience here with us tonight, and we have a very special guest, a great friend of mine, and a radio legend in the Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia tri-state area. Anybody that's from that region knows who I'm going to say here, Mr. Jack Bogut. He's going to come on in a little bit. So I want to tell you a little bit about Jack. I'm going to let him tell you how we met when he comes on. But I had the pleasure of meeting Jack, and he requested from me a few months after we met if I would be interested in composing music to one of his stories. And I agreed. I thought I was very honored, that he would ask. And so we started, and I think that was around 1993. We had started a working relationship, and we ended up doing a single project called The Joys of Growing Up Italian, as well as 4 albums of Jack's original stories, where I composed the music and produced the albums. And I think around 2018, 2019, I finally agreed to do a solo piano album, which my family and friends had bugged me to do it. I hadn't done one. And I love playing the piano, but I agreed to do it. And I asked Jack if he would be willing to produce my solo piano album, as I produced all of his albums with his stories. And he agreed to do that. So the album is called Inner Space. And before I bring Jack out, I'd like to play a little clip. I put a few little clips of some of the songs that I played. And of course, this album, like everything that I have with Me 3 and other things, are all available on your favorite streaming services, and you can download them as well. So this is Inner Space. Have a look at this and listen. have a couple selections from Inner Space. Hope you enjoyed that. Before I bring Jack, I want to read a little bit of his bio. Of course, I condensed this for the purpose of saving time here, because we want to hear what Jack has to say. If Pittsburgh were to construct a Mount Rushmore for radio, Jack Bogut would stand tallest among those sculpted. In a celebrated career that continues into its 8th decade, your Bogut dominated the Steel City's ratings for more than 15 consecutive years, 1968 to 1983, while hosting the Bogut in the Morning Show on KDKA AM. As an example of that dominance, the April-May 1976 ARB, that's the American Research Bureau, credited Jack with an unparalleled 41.4% audience share, greater than the next 13 stations in the market combined. Amazing. Even with his popularity, Jack's ability to simultaneously harness the power of radio and the kindness in the hearts of the listeners for the philanthropic good has left an indelible yet warm and fuzzy mark on Pittsburgh broadcasting. Perhaps most amazing and defining is how Jack used his morning show platform and philanthropic muscle to raise both awareness and millions of dollars for worthy charities, including the Free Care Fund at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh and the Make-A-Wish Foundation of Western Pennsylvania. Ironically and prophetically, Jack himself heard KDKA for the first time when he was growing up in rural north central Montana. In 1942, a 6-year-old Jack Bogut attended a tiny one-room, all-grades school. One day, the teacher showed his class a prize she got in a box of Cracker Jacks. It was a small radio crystal with instructions detailing how to connect it to a piece of copper wire, wrap the wire around the box a few times, and depending on the direction it was pointed, if you held the crystal to your ear, you might be able to hear a distant radio station. His classmates only heard static, but Jack heard a faint voice say the call letters of a station he didn't recognize then. The call letters were KDKA. Who could have known or even suspected that 26 years later, in 1968, he would become the morning host and favorite personality of the world's first radio station, KDKA Pittsburgh. Among his other accolades, Jack was inducted into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, received the Pittsburgh Radio and Television Club Lifetime Achievement Award, and was presented with a March of Dimes Achievement in Radio Lifetime Achievement Award. Jack Bogut will forever be remembered for the unparalleled way he harnessed the power of radio and channeled it for philanthropic good. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, please welcome to the stage Mr. Jack Bogut. Bogut, it's your DeSalvo in the morning.
Yes, it is. And that's about all I have. So thanks, everybody. Good night. Oh, Vito, it is nice to see you, my friend. Boy, we have a history together.
We do.
Went all the way from Montana to one day crushing grapes in your garage.
That's for sure. Amazing. So, that being said, when you arrived in Pittsburgh as the morning radio host on KDKA, this was 1968.
Right.
I was a junior in high school. And by the way, I listened to you every morning when I was getting dressed. And even when I went on to Duquesne University, I lived at home and I listened to every morning and driving to the school and everything. And of course, at night, my other hero was Johnny Carson, and I listened to you in the morning,
Wow.
Johnny Carson after the 11 o'clock news, and so you were my heroes, and it's pretty interesting. But the ARB rating was 21% share when you arrived in 1968, and by
Right.
66, your morning show had doubled its rating to 41.4 share. You were number 2 in America. Those ratings consistently high. In 1982, you were featured on Good Morning America as one of the top 4 morning radio personalities in the country. Jack, wasn't that a conflict with competing TV stations?
Well, yeah, consider this, Vito. KTKA at that time was a Westinghouse broadcasting station. Channel 2 was a CBS television station. So Good Morning America had to go to Channel 4, WTAE TV, and say, hey, we'd like to feature one of your competitors on our morning show, which you will have to broadcast if you want to carry Good Morning America, and then be allowed to allow Channel 2, your direct competitor in television, to rebroadcast the. You see how this is going, and oddly enough, WTAE TV was gracious enough to allow all of this to happen, and it was a crowning moment and something absolutely unexpected.
That's awesome. Before I get into how you and I met, because I want you to tell that story, but
Okay.
before that point, I would like to ask you about how you got started in radio. And I do have a little montage I put together with from one of the stories from Mental Movies. There was a story you did called "Failing Your Way to Success," and
Okay.
it's a great story. And we have a little excerpt from that. And I'd like
absolutely true story. Let me back up just 2 steps, Vito. And
sure.
when I was a kid and I was growing up, looking back now, there was an undiagnosed, but I suspect a case of ADHD on my part. That's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because I was a busy kid and I had to be doing something all the time. One of which, I went to Bible school, to a Lutheran church in Loring, Montana. And I didn't mean to be impertinent, but I questioned everything, and I had a short attention span. So I questioned things and then waited for an answer and moved on. For example, I asked a minister at Bible school one time, I said, is it a sin to remember all the swear words we're not supposed to use? He turned his head and I think he smiled a little bit, but I wasn't sure. I also asked him one time, I said, I think 10 commandments are not enough. He said, what do you mean? I said, I think there should be 11 commandments. He said, what would the 11th one be? I said, thou shalt not take thyself too seriously. He didn't laugh at that either, but I got word later on that he did tell other people what I had said. So, I was kind of a rule breaker all that time.
Okay.
And I constantly sought opportunity to do something different. Well, a guy named Tom Harrington played saxophone in a little dance band I had, and he would do anything for money because he was paying his own way through school. And he got wind of a job. A guy who got married was given a wedding present by his father-in-law, which was a construction permit for a radio station. And the only vacant permit that was open was in Dillon, Montana. So this guy built a radio station. He had no experience, had a nice voice, but absolutely no experience in radio at all. He built one in a cow pasture, a livestock pasture, north of Dillon, Montana. So that's the beginning of the story here. So one day I heard Tom Harrington, my friend, coming out of my mother's car radio. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's famous. I wonder if I could be famous too. So I went out to see him and I said, hey, Tom. He said he would just barely speak to me now because he's famous. And I said, how did you get this job? And he said, well, I made an audition tape. I said, what's an audition tape? And he said, well, you speak in, you get some news copy and you speak into that tape recorder over there. And I said, could I make an audition tape? I would like a job here if possible. So he said, sure. So he handed me some news copy and went over and started the reel-to-reel machine. And Vito, do you remember the first time you heard your recorded voice?
Yes.
It wasn't pleasant, was it?
No.
Because we listen to bone-conducted sound. We resonate in our heads, right? If you hear air-conducted sound coming out of a speaker, it's not the same. So I heard my voice coming out, and I thought, no way, Jose. So I forgot the scheduled job, and he said, yeah, and he said, there was another guy there, and he said, Jack, I want to introduce you to Bert. He said, he's the owner of the radio station. And I said, hi, Bert, how you doing? Fine. He said, did you make a tape? I said, yeah. He said, I said, is it any good? And he says, no. But he said, I need somebody out here next Monday morning because I've got another commitment. Would you like to go on the air? And I said, absolutely. So I showed up Monday morning. The pay was 25 cents an hour, and he wanted me to pay him. And then he laughed about it because crazy sense of humor. So I showed up Monday morning, got started, and Vito, I was just terrible. I was always behind the eight ball. I was never prepared. We had two big turntables where we would play music. Everything was written. Supposed to read it, hit a button, play some music, read something else, hit a button. So he said, Bogut, he said, we've got the first sponsored newscast ever on the air, and I can't be there, so you'll have to do it. He said, don't mess it up. Brought to you by Coast to Coast Hardware. And I said, okay. Well, the day of the newscast, I was chronically unprepared, and I got into the newscast and realized that I didn't have the commercial. I had no idea what to say about Coast to Coast Hardware. So I stalled and read the news rather poorly, and I got to the point where I had to. Well, you've got you have a mental movie that you and I put together about this subject matter, right?
You want to see it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me show this right here.
Have more news after this word from our sponsor, Coast to Coast Hardware. At that precise moment, a sheep that had wandered through the open gate into the control room looked at me and went, meh, meh. It was the most thunderous animal sound I'd ever heard. This was like adding an earthquake to a forest fire. I had no idea what to do, but I could not continue with that animal looking at me, threatening to bleat again. So I lowered my voice for authority and extra credibility and announced, as seriously as I could, you may be surprised at this, but I have a farm animal, a sheep, standing here in the studio looking at me. The radio station is located in a pasture just north of the Club Royal, and I must have left the gate and the fence open when I came in. As long as the U remains quiet, we'll continue with the news, brought to you by Coast to Coast Hardware. And the sheep bleated again. Meh! The magic word seemed to be the sponsor's name. So I said it again. This news is brought to you by Coast to Coast Hardware. Meh! Coast to Coast Hardware. Meh! That stupid sheep bleated every time I said the sponsor's name. I was painted into a corner. I couldn't do the commercial without mentioning the sponsor's name, and if I did, the sheep, I had no choice but to get the animal out of there. It also occurred to me that if the audience, and Bill, if God forbid he was listening, had not actually heard the sheep on the air, they might think I was just stalling until I either got organized or regained my composure. So I turned up the volume on the microphone as high as it would go and said, as I got up and stomped noisily toward the sheep, "I'm approaching the wayward ewe and will now physically encourage her to leave the building," as the sheep noisily tried to scratch tracks in the linoleum with her cloven hooves. After pushing the sheep out the front door, I slammed it loudly and stomped back into the control room, making as much noise as I could so that people listening would know what was going on and that I was returning to the studio. I readjusted the microphone volume, took a deep breath, cleared my throat, and got the giggles. Not just a few fading snickers, but convulsive, systemic belly laughs that made my nose run and eyes water. I remember shutting off the microphone and trying to compose myself, but as soon as I opened the mic again, I was off to the races. I all but rolled on the floor, shrieking and howling like an idiot, close to losing control of all the muscles and functions in my body. I finally opened the mic again to include the audience and just left it that way as I cackled and banged on things in the room. After 3 or 4 interminable minutes of this, it was apparent to me, and I'm sure to the listeners as well, that the situation was totally lost. So I choked back a belly laugh and said, "I'm probably going to get fired for this, but that's pretty much the news," and snorked and giggled my way into a record. It wasn't 10 minutes later that I got a call from the station owner. "I didn't hear it, Bogut, but I understand you royally screwed up the first commercially sponsored newscast on the radio station." "Yes, sir, I guess I did. How did you hear about it?" I asked as I got ready to be unemployed. "I got a call from Coast to Coast Hardware," Bill said. "They were all listening down at the store, waiting to hear their very first commercial." I took a deep breath and braced myself as Bill continued. "The owner said it was one of the funniest things he's ever heard, and he wants to know if you can do it again tomorrow."
Absolutely true story. And your music in that, Vito, is perfect because you punctuated every single unfortunate event there. But just as kind of a conclusion to this, the next day I went down to Coast Hardware and met everybody and apologized for messing up the newscast. And they were so nice, and I thanked them for not getting me fired. And I went back to work at the radio station, and Bert came in and he said, "You know what?" He said, "The people at Coast to Coast Hardware," I'm sorry, me back up. When I did their commercial, I simply told that story about my going down to Coast Hardware and meeting the people and what nice people they were. And if you need anything to fix anything, blah, blah, blah. And the people that Coast to Coast Hardware said they would like for me to do their commercials from that point on. And there was a lesson that I didn't have to read things that were written. I could make up stories if I had a story to tell about a business or a person or whatever. So
You made everything personal. You did that with all your commercials in Pittsburgh too.
yeah, and from that point on, those were my commercials, and it got to the point where people would pay me to tell a story about their business or service or whatever it was.
Very, very, yeah. Now, you had told me a story, something about the Senate Majority Leader.
Okay. Dillon, Montana had a rodeo every Labor Day. That was the event of the year. And politicians and people came from all over the state because they had a big stadium and a rodeo that was one of the best in the country. So the Senate Majority Leader a Democrat, Mike Mansfield of Montana, came down to make some political hay. And with a new radio station in town, he asked the owner if he could come out for an interview. The owner was busy that day doing something else. So he said, Bogut, Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield is coming in. Be nice to him. Okay. So the senator came in and we talked about things, and he was very nice, and we got all done. And I said, Senator Mansfield, I said, I have a question if you have another minute. He said, of course. I said, the payola scandals. He said, oh, yes, I've heard about those. I know about those. And I said, people taking money under the counter to play certain records on the air. And I said, people ask me if we're doing that out here. And I say, no, we're not doing that out here. But they don't always believe me. So I said, we're getting some of the blame, but we're not getting any of the money. Could you possibly send some of the money out here for us? And he looked at me and he just shook his head and smiled and laughed. But I found that I could kind of break the rules and kid somebody no matter what their stature was in life. And so there is another door to a radio personality that is creaking open, and another part of a career.
And speaking of your career, you told me that two times you turned down the job at KDKA. Can you?
Yes. Yeah. Well, then quickly, I was in Salt Lake City, got a promotion for the radio station in Salt Lake City, which was the head of the Intermountain Radio Network. And I was doing an afternoon show at the time. And a representative of all of the advertising agencies came in one day and said, Jack, the National Association of Broadcasters Convention is being held here in Salt Lake City. And he said, I'm wondering if you could do a composite of all the radio stations in the market and write and produce it so we could present it at the convention. And I said, well, answer two questions for me. Number one, is there any money in it? And number two, have you been to everybody else in town and turned down? He said, no and yes. So I thought, you know what, I'm not really all that busy. So I got an audio check of all the radio stations in the market and put a composite together and wrote a script and everything and recorded it. And thought, for the good of the industry, I'm part of it now. So one afternoon, the radio station manager came in and said, Jack, he said, this is Phil Nolan of Westinghouse Broadcasting. He's here for the NAB convention, and he heard the composite tape that you made, and he liked it and just wanted to stop by and say hello. And I said, hi, Phil. Welcome to Salt Lake City. Nice to have you here. Hope that you have a good stay. And I went back to playing a record or whatever it was. Little did I know that based on that tape, he stayed in town 2 days to listen to my show.
Wow.
And then he contacted me and he said, Jack, he said, I'd like to offer you a job. How would you like to go to work at KDKA Radio in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? Wow, the station I had listened to as a kid. And I said, no, thanks, Phil. If I make a move, I want to go someplace nice. Because I had heard and read all the news reports of the big, dirty steel city where they had to turn the lights on at noon and all of that stuff. And he said, oh, well, we've got a station in Los Angeles. Would you like to go there? I said, of course. Well, we're making arrangements to going to Los Angeles, and one day I get a phone call, Jack, Tony Graham, I'm the national program manager for Westinghouse Broadcasting, and we just sold our radio station in Los Angeles. How would you like to go to Pittsburgh? And I said, no. And he said, wait a minute. I understand you turned the job down once before. have you ever been in Pittsburgh? And I said, no, I never have. He said, why don't you come back and then give me an answer? So I flew in January one year in a snowstorm. The local program manager picked me up in his TR3, a sports car that's about 2 inches off the ground. We followed a salt truck, salt and cinders, all the way from the old airport into Pittsburgh. And I keep asking, those lights there, is that Pittsburgh? He said, no, that's that big water tower is what you call your green tree. And so we come down off the hill, and I said, is that Pittsburgh? No, that's a Duquesne Gray Armory over there. I said, where is Pittsburgh? And he said, you know. Well, the Fort Pitt tunnels at that time had bricks or a surface in there. And Vito, it was like a drum roll. And we come through, and Pittsburgh bursts into view, and I had never seen anything like that in my life. And it was snowing, but it was clear. We went up on Mount Washington and sat there and had dinner and watched tow boats go up and down the river. And we fell in love with Pittsburgh immediately. And then we moved there. I signed an agreement with KDKA on April Fool's Day and went to work on April the 15th in 1968. And the rest is history.
This history. That's right. That's awesome. Love that story. And you're right. I mean, anybody that comes to our city, when you take them through that tunnel, and then whether it's daylight or it's nighttime, I mean, it's just an impressive sight. You know, that's true. Now I want you to share how you met me, my group, my wife, Lana. We talked about that for a second.
Yeah, it was the Three Rivers Regatta. And what year was it? Do you remember, Vito?
I don't, but I know that you were with WJAS at that point.
Yeah.
And it was you had to introduce the talent.
I think the later in the 1980s, and we three was the group that was playing at the Three Rivers Regatta, and I had a chance to introduce the group.
That's right.
And Vito, that was some of the best music I had ever heard. And I was so taken with the music that I wandered up backstage, and Lana was there. And, I told her what a great group I thought it was. And ultimately, we met. And not only was I a big fan of yours, but you had listened to KDKA radio when you were growing up, and the rest went on from there.
Yeah. It was that was a true story. Now, about a few months later, after we met, I got a call from you, and you had gotten a story from a friend of yours, or one of your clients, actually. I think it was from the guy that owned Papa J's in Carnegie, and
yes,
he gave you this story, and you asked me if I would be interested in composing music as you narrated the story, and I said I said I'd be honored to do that, And we did. This was our very first project. I think 1993. This was.
Okay.
And we did The Joys of Growing Up Italian.
Yes.
And I actually have a little clip of this too. If I can share it with the audience, I want to show them this here. This is what I did was, it's about, the whole story is about 12 minutes long.
Right.
But I took a little bit of the beginning and then, of course, a little bit of the ending. So let's play this here.
This may sound kind of strange to you, but I was almost into adulthood before I realized I was an American. I'd never really thought about it. My family was born in America, and we'd lived here all of our lives, but somehow it never occurred to any of us that just being a citizen of the United States meant we were Americans. To us, Americans were people who spoke or understood only one language and ate peanut butter and jelly on mushy white bread that came out of plastic packages. We were different. We were Italian. The big family gatherings became fewer, and something seemed to be missing when we did get together. It just wasn't the same. We didn't realize it, but we were slowly drifting apart as time and space eroded the daily bond that once tied us all so closely together. The holidays changed too. The great quantity of food we once consumed without any ill effect wasn't good for us anymore. Too much starch, too much cholesterol, too many calories. And nobody bakes anymore. We're all too busy. We just buy what we need and talk about how much it tastes like mom's or grandma's. Even the neighborhood is different. The carefully painted and maintained houses my grandparents bought so long ago are covered with aluminum siding and just don't look the same. My mother still lives in one, and strangers, Metagons, live in the other. Of course, all the gardens have disappeared now, planted in grass or ground cover. The grapevines are gone, and the last of the homemade wine has long since been drunk. For a few years, we did try to make regular rounds and visit, but we're all spread too far apart now, so we use the phone a lot. Today, we meet at weddings and funerals and visit the cemetery often. Many of the people we cared about are there now. Grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, even my own father. Now, when we do get together, it's either at my house or my sister's house, and we still enjoy it. After all, family, la familia, is still everything. But for those of us who remember back when, it's just not the same. Too many things are missing or different. We have changed, the neighborhood has changed, and the differences between us and them are not so easily defined anymore either. And that's good. I think that's the way it's supposed to be. It is the nature of things to change, as surely as the passage of time. My grandparents were Italians. My parents were Italian-Americans. I'm an American-Italian, and my children are American-Americans. We are all Americans now. Irish, German, Polish, Jewish. Call it culture, call it roots, I'm not sure what it really is. Life is still very good, and the memories are great. But still, there's a small part of me that will always be a little bit sad. My children will never experience firsthand a wonderful and important piece of who they are. They will never get to know my grandparents and the joys of growing up Italian.
And there you have it.
Yeah.
There you have it. I have to tell one little thing. When you made the first recording of your voice narrating that story, now there's no music in it, and you brought it over to me, whatever. And then I was in my studio by myself and I played it, and I'm listening to this, and by the time it got to the end, this was my story. I mean, this is how I grew up. And
Yeah.
it was probably 90% of how I grew up. And honest to God, Jack, I had tears in my eyes by the end of the story. I'm thinking, how am I going to work on this project? I can't, it's too emotional for me, And so it was great. That was our very first project. And then after that, we started with your original stories.
Yes.
I remember the first one was Big Sky Cafe. That was our first, and of course, that's indicative of where you grew up, right?
Yes, it is.
Big Sky
And,
Country.
Vito, we should also mention that your daughter, Gina, did the artwork for all of our CDs. And she really captured the essence with that cover.
Yeah, I remember her doing this one here, especially. This was our last full album, Past, Present, Accounted For.
Yeah.
Yep. And Gina did that as well. And so, yeah. Now, I have a couple of pictures I want to put up here. One is this picture here. Give us a little background on this.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah,
You're really young, there, Jack.
possibly you wouldn't recognize me. I am second from the right. That tall, really thin guy with a lot of blonde hair. I was a newly commissioned second lieutenant in the Montana National Guard, and I went through officer candidate school and ultimately became an instructor. And I retired when I was a first lieutenant, but that was that was a long, long story all by itself. But I'm proud of that picture. Well, I accepted the award for upon graduation as the outstanding cadet,
Oh,
getting a commission. And our son John was about 2 years old then.
mhm.
He jumped down out of his mother's arms and ran down toward the stage and said, "Want that, Daddy? Want that, Daddy?"
Uh,
One of those golden moments. But
well, speaking of John, your son, when you were on KDKA, you often mentioned Joni, and of course, Lana and I have got, we've been out to dinner with Joni so many times, and but that was a big part of your show of bringing your family and your kids and Joni into the picture. You want to talk about that? And I have a picture. This is a good picture here. This
oh
is
yeah,
the Bogut family right
yes,
here.
yeah. Our son John on the left, and then of course Joni, our middle daughter Brenda in the middle, yours truly, and our youngest daughter Lisa over on the right hand side
Mhm.
is looking at the photograph. But Vito, there was never any preconceived notion of how to do a radio show on my part. I didn't sit down and say, "Oh, I'm going to Pittsburgh, and this is how I'm going to run the show, and this is going to be successful." I was just me. Consider that in 1968, Martin Luther King was killed. There were demonstrations in the streets all over America. Bobby Kennedy was killed. The economy was bad. Korea had hijacked a ship to the embarrassment of the United States Navy. The steel industry was really in trouble. And I thought, if I thought anything at all, you know what? I need to talk about what we have in common, not what separates us. I need to talk about things that bring us together. And, speaking of bringing together, let me tell you a quick story here about a guy in San Francisco. He drank a lot, and he would go on a running drunk and be missing from work for a couple of days. And then he would come back. He never got fired. He would come back and he'd say, "All right, my people, I went out and got a little tipsy for you, because I knew that if you went out and got a little tipsy, you would get fired. But because so many of you listen to me, they can't fire me."
Wow.
So one day, and this is a classic example for me, at least, one day traffic in San Francisco was just terrible. It was fog and cars and everything under the sun, and traffic was stalled. So he said, "Look, my people, I'm going to get you to work faster than anybody else, but you got to trust me. I want you to roll all the windows down in your car and turn the radio up loud. It's going to be kind of silent but trust me." So people listening rolled their windows down, turned the sound up on the radio, and after a few seconds, this guy played a siren. And all the people that weren't listening to him on KSFO pulled over to the side, and his people went right to work. After that, the Federal Communications passed a law that you cannot play an emergency signal on the air.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Is that a funny story? But what he really did was he united the audience
Yeah.
in a common cause, something that appealed to everybody. So one morning, traffic in Pittsburgh is just terrible. The roads have been slick and it's been salted, but I mean, traffic is jammed up everywhere. So I said, "Look, I know you're in trouble and people won't let you in and they won't let you out, and you can't go forward and you're afraid to back up. So if you are listening to me right now, honk your horn in a friendly honk and blink your lights and let other people know that we are all united in this thing, and you need to pull over or let somebody in or slow down or do whatever. And Vito, I'm looking at the footpit bridge, and every headlight came on and every horn honked and scared the hell out of me. I had no idea that, but we united the people in a common cause, and they started being nice to each other, and temporarily we solved the problem. So, it's the audience that is the magic here.
That's right. And you did the same thing, uniting the people with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And tell the story about the Farkleberry tart. I think that's a good story.
All right. KDKA in 1968 was a press old newsboy. Business people would go downtown and they would sell newspapers for too much money, and then the money they collected would go to Children's Hospital. Well, KDKA radio, of course, couldn't do that, so they asked for a penny a month for each member of your family. They collected $1,200 at the year in 1967. I thought, my God, this is a 50,000 watt clear channel radio station, and they're only collecting $1,200. So I, with a sense of humor, I hoped, I said, look, don't give the mailman a hernia by taping pennies to a piece of cardboard and mailing this to the Children's Hospital Fund. Paper is much easier to mail than coins. And that year we got $12,000.
Wow.
So, that was so successful. My first client was the Joseph Horn Company. And I thought, well, maybe if we go down and broadcast and have people come down, they'll donate more than $1. And they came down. We had a collection barrel on the outside. And that year, I think we collected like $15,000 or $20,000. Then, wow. And I'll make this as short as I can. A woman sent me an article out of the Denver Post, a newspaper in Denver, Colorado, about a Farkleberry Bush Festival in North Dakota. Now, you have to understand that, number one, the Farkleberry word is a funny word all by itself.
That's right.
And Farkleberry Bush Festival in North Dakota. In Montana, we used to kid North Dakota and say that the North Dakota is so flat the state tree is a fence post. They would in turn make fun of Montana by saying stuff about us. So I thought it was really funny to talk about a bush festival of any kind in North Dakota. Well, one day I was saying, okay, kids, it's time to start your heart, eat a Farkleberry tart and tear the world apart. I had no idea where that came from. It was just spontaneous.
Okay.
So I went to Jim Delegati, who owned all the McDonald's restaurants in Western Pennsylvania. He also invented the Big Mac. And I went to Jim and I said, Jim, I think I could sell Farkleberry tarts for $1 a piece, but I have no idea how to make them. He said, what is a Farkleberry tart? And I said, I don't know. Could you make a little cookie with red food coloring sprinkled in it? And we'll call it a Farkleberry tart. And I'll make a little envelope that you can put them in. And I'll write a little false narrative of some kind. And we could sell those for $1 a piece for Children's Hospital. And he said, okay. And he made Farkleberry tarts. And we sold them for $1 a piece for Children's Hospital. And that year we made $50,000.
Wow.
And he never charged a nickel for making and distributing the Farkleberry tarts. So Pittsburgh, we did a survey, Vito, to find out the most generous city per capita in America. And it was Pittsburgh, far and away. So the generosity was not a surprise.
So, Jack, you were certainly the right person with the right skills at the right time and at the right place. Huh?
Yeah. And it was all fortunate. It was not planned. It all of the pieces just happened to fall into place at the right time. And Vito, there is no way in the world to express how thankful I am for being one of those luckiest people on the planet.
I understand. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
To just make my living doing what I love to do is a miracle, blessing.
Yeah.
I have to tell one quick story about the wine because, well, it's actually two little stories. First of all, you would come over to the house and we'd have dinner and whatever and take you down to the wine cellar and you enjoyed a nice glass of homemade wine and sometimes a homemade cognac after dinner we would have. But one time when I first invited you to come out and we were going to press the grapes one day, which is it's the hardest day of the whole winemaking year is the pressing because it's a dirty day. I mean, it's a messy time and takes a long time. And then of course, afterwards we always have, Lana and be cooking, other girls that help with bringing food and we'd have a nice meal and we'd drink some wine and things. So I invited you out and I said, yeah, just come on out about 10 o'clock, tomorrow morning. And you came out and you had on a beautiful, looked like brand new to me, white sweatshirt because it's in the fall. It was a little cool. And I looked at you and I said, Jack, what are you thinking? I said, we're going to make wine. That shirt's going to get all messed up with that beautiful white sweatshirt. And you, without a hesitation, you said, but I'm going to dedicate this just to winemaking.
Uh-huh.
That was your answer. And then the next thing, the second part of that story was that the next morning you were on the air on WJAS. You were on the air and you mentioned that you were at my home and you helping me make wine. And as soon as you got off the air, I called you. I said, Jack, I was still teaching at the time. I said, I'm an educator. I said, education and alcohol don't go together real well. You can't mention anything about me making wine. Sure enough, that the next day, one of my students came up to me and said, hey, Mr. D, when are we going to get some of that wine? I said, after you graduate.
Yes, and as I recall, you made an emergency phone call to me and said, Bogut,
Yeah.
we weren't making wine. We were just crushing grapes. That's all.
That's right. But after I retired from teaching, I said, Jack, you can say anything you want now. I don't care.
That was so much fun. You had a crew there, Vito.
Always, yeah. We made a lot of wine and it was fun. And, my cousin Paulie was with me and my neighbor Richie and one of my best friends, Sal. We were the four winemakers and we had a blast doing that for 38 years. We made wine 38 years in a row. So it was a great time, to do that. But anyhow, Jack, I don't know, are there any other moments or stories or, I do have that one other video. If you think I should show it, do you want to talk about that with it was from Inner Space, me playing Emmanuel.
Yes. Yeah. Vito, let me back off just a little bit. Lana, your wife, your roommate of Low these many years is, I think she's still in the room there, because Lana and you and I were down in your studio one time and we were listening to you play some music. And I said, Vito, the only thing that could make this a little bit better is if you had some strings that you put behind the songs that you are playing. And so we talked about it a little bit. And I said, because, that's audio velvet. And if you would play all of these songs that people want you to play, and put a little strings behind there, we could call it Inner Space. And so your daughter Gina made the cover with you in outer space. I guess there's a moon behind it, right? You've got that cover there somewhere, and the songs that you put together with the strings that you put together after the fact, I think that album is absolute magic. We had our kids here the other day, and we started to play Inner Space. We played the whole thing and listened to it all afternoon long. I mean, it was just terrific. So you've got a piece to play, right?
I do. It's called Emmanuel. I'm going to play this. Hang on one second. Here we go.
Wow. You ever think of doing that for a living?
Maybe. I don't know. When I grow up, I was thinking about doing it.
Oh, Vito,
A lot of those, most of those pictures I took personally, in my travels, not on vacation travels, but business travel, performing around the world. And it was, but yeah, that was fun. That was fun putting that together too. And it was great having you along my side when I did that whole album. I know that you're a radio guy, you're a broadcaster, but you're not necessarily a musician, but you always appreciated music. You were, to me, I consider you a musician because you know exactly, you know so much about music, and you were so careful how they chose the music for your shows and things like that. I love that, you know. That one little blues thing that you played every Friday morning, I can't remember the name of it, but that was a great little blues tune. You remember what I'm talking about?
No.
Every Friday morning you played this little blues song, and it was a vocal. Somebody sang, you know, on a thing. It was great. If I had it, I'd play it, but I don't have it. But you were always so tuned in to the music, you know. And over the years, we've exchanged so much music.
And Vito, let me interject something here. Here you were with a master's degree in music and the director of music for the West Mifflin School District. And you and I are putting this Christmas CD together. And you played, I think it was We Wish You a Merry Christmas. And I said, hang on a second, Vito. We don't want to play We Wish You a Merry Christmas here so that the audience is distracted from the storyline. We want to play We Wish You a Merry Christmas this way. Dum, 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 dum. And we stretch it out over 16 bars, so We Wish You a Merry Christmas is subliminal. They don't realize that they're actually listening to, and you didn't resent it, you didn't resist it. You are the ultimate student, and you are willing to learn anything there is to learn. And we put it together, and the rest is absolute magic. So that is something I've always admired about you.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. Thank you. It was always an honor to work with you too.
So we did some good stuff together.
We did. And I was honored to be with you when you received the National Broadcast Hall of Fame Award in Ohio. You're going to be honored again with the Pennsylvania Broadcasters Association Award and Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I can't be there this time because I'm a little too far away. But I know your family's all going to be there, and that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yep.
Your entire family.
La familia, right?
La familia.
Yeah.
Right.
There's nothing more important than family, and it looks like all of our kids and grandkids, and even our first great grandchild, who will not be born until June, but he will be there anyway.
Congratulations.
I call him the great one. But yeah, that comes up on April the 11th in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So yeah, it's going to be fun. So,
awesome.
You know, Vito, over the years, you and I have agreed on this. The best we can be is helpful to others, right?
That's right.
The best way to communicate is by storytelling. That's always better than just giving someone facts and figures and stuff like that.
Or text someone.
And music is a universal language.
Absolutely. I was lucky to travel around the world, and it didn't matter what country you're in, what language they spoke. Music is music, the same all over the world.
Well, didn't you conduct the Japanese symphony?
It was China. It was Shanghai.
Ah, okay.
Shanghai Symphony, and with Georgia Fumanti. And Georgia, she is originally from Tuscany, Italy, but she lives now in Montreal. She's going to be a guest on the show I think in the beginning of May. So, yeah. And we did China. We were in Shanghai for like 11 or 12 days together, and that was an amazing experience. You know, it really was.
Well, and did you speak any Chinese?
I did not a word.
Did they speak any English?
No. I mean, fortunately, the story is a little too long to tell, but there was a flutist in the orchestra. And he came up to me, And he says, my name is Michael. He said, Maestro, they call me Maestro. Maestro, if you need anything, don't be afraid to ask. And I said, well, thank you, Michael. I do have a question. I had a question about how long I could work the orchestra before we needed to take a break. Because I know here in the U.S., we have unions and there are union musicians and you're supposed to go so long and take a break. And he said, I'll find out. I'll talk to the personnel director and I'll get back to you. I said, okay. In the meantime, the next day he said to me, Maestro, and he went on and he said, are you from Italy? And I said, no, because, Georgia was Italy. I mean, this was the year, and I believe it was 2010, when they had the World Expo in Shanghai. And we were hired by the Italian government to perform at the Shanghai Concert Hall with a symphony as part of the exhibition that the Italians put on. So that's the kind of the way that went. But anyhow, as it turned out, he's asking me, well, I said, no, I'm from the United States. He said, we thought you were coming from Italy. I said, no, I'm from the U.S. He said, where in the U.S.? And I'm thinking, he's not going to know Pittsburgh. I said, Pennsylvania. And he said, Pennsylvania? He said, where? I said, Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh. He said, I went to Duquesne University. And I'm like, you're kidding. I said, that's where I did my undergraduate work too. So here's this guy. I'm halfway around the world, and he went to the same college I did in the same town where I grew up. And so it was an interesting story. But he spoke English perfectly. I mean, and of course Mandarin, but I didn't really learn any of the Mandarin. I had translators with me all the time and all the things. But it was good. But you're right. Music is an international language. And that leads us to the last thing that we're going to say, and that's your 11th commandment, right?
Yes. The best social philosophy is the 11th commandment. Thou shalt not take thyself too seriously.
And that's so true.
Yeah, amen to that, huh?
When you start to take yourself seriously, you're in trouble.
Yep, deep
trouble. Jack, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. I appreciate you taking the time to be with me, to be on Memories of a Musician. And please give your bride a big hug from me.
I will do that.
Yeah, tell her I said. And
you give Lena a big hug from us, and onward and upward.
You got it. Cheers, my friend. Salute.
Yep. Take care.
All right. You have a great evening. Thank you. And there we go. Another episode of Memories of a Musician. Remember that this show is streamed live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can leave comments, et cetera, et cetera. We appreciate spreading the word and letting all your friends and family know about the show. Every week we have a different guest. We have a lot of interesting and wonderful musicians and guests coming up. And our guest next week is another great friend of mine and a great jazz musician in Jim Guerra, saxophonist and educator, music educator and performer. And he's going to be on the show. And he has quite a history of performing and teaching and so forth. So Jimmy's going to be here with us. And so I want to salute everybody. Have a great evening. And thanks for tuning in.